creatures are communicating with us. So we're about to end a little saga here, and we've heard close to 8 vocalizations of quiet.
Dr. Rob Alley.
Thanks, Jason. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. I have a few photographs, a few digital photos that I've taken this spring just on Revilla Island near Ketchikan, right at the southern tip of the Panhandle, in a study area where we've had several sightings within a mile, and of a male we imagine a male about 8 or 9 feet tall, who seems to like to sit and watch hunters. Okay, and I can't tell you that any of these trail signs, any of these marks of vegetation, can be directly attributed to a Sasquatch. It's purely speculative on our part to the local Ketchikan researchers to suggest that, but there's no doubt in our minds, so we're operating on that premise. We've seen nothing with bears or with other people up the trails that we're studying to cause us to think otherwise. However, we see a lot of bear sign and weather sign. We see a lot of wolves and bears, and lately we've been seeing brown bear, and that's about once a year. We're not supposed to have brown bear on Revilla Island. It's one of the southernmost islands in the Alaskan archipelago. Really, it's not much different than Puget Sound or Vancouver Island in terms of overall climate or appearance, but I'm getting some cougar coming in lately too. We don't have moose, we don't have elk, we just have black-tailed deer, and we have lots of stories about Sasquatches, known by various 3 native names, Kushtaka by the Tlinkits. I've been accused by colleagues and literary sorts who are perhaps really better qualified in anthropology than my bachelor's degree gave me. I'm a physical therapist by profession. That I've grievously mixed up Sasquatches and land otter men among the native tribes in the Pacific Northwest. I simply refer to these creatures all as Sasquatches, just because most of my native informants who have different names for them in their own language use Sasquatch anyway, rather than say Tlingit Kushtaka or Haida Gagit or Simshan Bukwash Baush. So these trail signs I'm going to show you, Jason, if you want to start it. These are a series of slides or digital pictures taken from, first of all, the fern I'm going to show you, kind of a twisted fern. It's actually a woven sword fern, and it was tied in a loop about 25 feet above a trail that doesn't get used and had no tracks on it, freshly tied in a little knot. There were patches in the snow or something where any of you might have stepped if you'd come down off the top of the mountain. But this past December, I don't think anybody came down off Deer Mountain that particular day and tied this fern in a knot. I happened to spot it just because it looked odd. It caught my eye. And you don't have to read Tom Brown Tracker's books to be able to spot odd stuff or stuff that stands out on the side of the trail. I just hopped through the snow and picked it up. And go ahead and flip to the next one. We have a fern. It truly was tied. It was a nice big loop, and it just couldn't have happened through happenstance. I hike that particular trail, once every 2 or 3 days, and it hadn't been there 2 days previously, and I don't know, I suppose a bear could do it. Of course, a human could do it. It just didn't seem likely. Sword fern. Now, this is a species that has an edible root. You could eat it raw or you could cook it. Natives used to. And, of course, it's a winter food for natives, traditional winter food for native sword fern root. Just some other shots of this particular sword fern. There was one sighting on this particular trail about 3 months prior. A high school boy taking a shortcut along the trail reported seeing a 7-foot-tall creature. These alder branches along a trail at White River, about 20 miles north of Ketchikan, illustrate a variety of different changes, damage to the leaves, to the branches that can be caused by various things. And we'll discuss some of these here. weather, possible Sasquatches, bears, deer, man, various things, ice. These breaks are a little tough to distinguish between ice damage, which normally happens. Ice damage normally occurs right close to the trunk, so it would break off here. If it was ice or snow loading, the branch tends to break off close to the trunk. Ice and wind and weather like we've been getting in the Pacific Northwest also tends to cause a real spear. If you get a real sharp spear sticking up on the main stem, maybe more dramatic than that. I'd have to say, quite honestly, that these, still in my mind, might have been bent down by a passing creature. There's no sign that a bear did this. There's no indication of bears having climbed or scuffed or bruised the bark anywhere, and they couldn't have reached this high. We're looking at that one, I think, was about a 7-foot one, and that was about a 6. We monitor these trails weekly, and we kind of know it's an area that hunters don't go a whole lot. There's a lot of deer, but there's deer everywhere else. These are what I would term weather breaks, okay? That may look sharp or neatly cut at a 90 degree at the end, but it's not. It just happens to be broken that way. Weather breaks tend to stick out, snow loading or ice loading. The main branch, the lateral branch on alder, tends to project out a great deal, and you've got a big, it sort of cracks away, peels away, and the snow keeps pulling it down. Just imagine the weather pulling the branch down, increasing the weight beyond the load that the lignin and the other proteins, the cellulose in the branch, are able to support. So, yes, it's true, a human could have done that, or a Sasquatch could have done that. Bears will eat some aspen buds in the spring. They don't girdle trees in Alaska like they do in Washington State or in parts of Oregon or in the tree farms in parts of British Columbia. We just don't have that problem with our black bears in Alaska. Go on to the next slide. This particular trail has had 2 really good vocalization reports within the last 2 years as well. Really loud screams, a territorial type of holler. The bears, I've been watching bears up here for 15 years, trying to get them out of my backyard and everywhere. And some of them big, over 550 pounds for the blacks, and we've just started getting a few more. Weather, again, this is typical. You're seeing a whole lot of branches all together. See the rain here, this March rain. We figured this damage had happened just prior to Christmas. The branches on the west coast, on the wet side of the west coast, aren't going to dry out. They're going to look fresh for months longer, or weeks at least longer, than they will on this side, or over in Idaho or in Montana, and or in Alberta, even central BC. So that's something you can watch for, help you determine how long ago something happened. There was no hair anywhere. We ran the little lint cleaners everywhere. These 3 breaks, about 5 feet off the side of the trail, were not this high. They were 6 feet, 5.5 and 5 feet. And the alder in these pictures shows that they were bent right down. No indication of feeding on the distal, on the far, very tiny shoots at the end. The apical shoots and the lateral shoots were all intact. This is a little bit punked out, a little bit of maybe fungal infection, but there's no indication either that the tree really lived after it was broken, that the sapling lived, and it had been bent down with some force, more than you're going to get with snow damage or ice. So when you see a complete U and it's bent right over, it's an indication you're looking at human bear or Sasquatch. And for bear, what you're going to see is the bear is usually going to stabilize the main branch. You'll find I have a few photos, maybe one photo that I'll illustrate later. You'll see the bear, he usually bites down on one part of the branch, the proximal piece, this piece, and then he brings up, we've watched them do it with huckleberries and spruce and so on, whether they're going for sap in the spruce, and then they'll break the further portion, the thinner portion of the branch with one forearm as they bring it down. Of course, moose and elk and large ungulates and even deer will get up in the shrubs and they'll try to pull it down, but when they do that, they leave a really ratty, torn end to the branch. You'll recognize that. It'll look just like this, but there'll be nothing left. That's what an ungulate will leave, a deer, an elk, a moose, when they're browsing. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay, just a picture of the Talbot Creek Trail, the North Talbot Creek Trail. It's right in the middle of Revilla Island. This is the trail I described that had the two vocalizations. The area where one sighting was from a hunter. Both sightings are by hunters. They finished blowing call and got up at the end of the day, going down the edge of the clear cut in this area, just over here, and it had sightings of Sasquatches. In one case, the Sasquatch just stood up and kind of waved at the hunter and took off. It's like, yeah, you didn't get anything. I saw that, you know. And there's a lot of beaver in this territory. There's just a lot of game. You see a lot. You'll see bear almost every other trip. This is Upper Talbot Creek. Just a little bit of late snow, February. And you've got Dolly Varden. It's a fall spawning char in the creek. You've got year-round cutthroat trout in the creek as well. No salmon getting up past the dam at Connell Lake to this part of the watershed, but lots of deer, some beaver, pond beaver, and I'm sure there's tons and tons of meadow voles and red squirrels. They're always there. You've seen these shots before. This is just a different view. We can flip right ahead with that. Okay, 41. All right. Now this is also North Talbot Creek, and it shows just a little muskeg on one side of the old trail. The old trail that we work off of is a grown-in logging road. It's been gated. It hasn't been used in the clear cut. Well, all this alder you're looking at is second growth, and it's 30 feet in some cases. So I'm going to say 25 years or more. It's a mixed hemlock spruce ecosystem. Just another shot of all this alder, this red alder, not Sitka alder, but red alder that's grown in, and gives you an idea how it looks a lot like one of the little places you might encounter here in coastal Oregon or Washington or British Columbia. Now, when you see branches, there's twist-offs, and you're familiar with twist-offs, and that's a pretty clear indication that a Sasquatch or, a whole team of guys has gone and broken a branch. But there are other simple breaks that can be more clearly attributed to Sasquatches or not, and they're called variously bend downs or bend ups or bend backs, or I'll call them a bend up as opposed to a bend down. When you take a branch and you bend it backwards against its natural line, leaning terra pizza, you're sort of fighting gravity. You know right away you're not looking at a snow load or an icing load, and when you're at 78 inches above the ground, it could be a bear, but again, you'll need to look for tooth marks, ideally, on that bear. You're always going to have the bear anchoring the branch with teeth a bit when he goes and bends it. Almost always. It's not impossible that a bear could do it without teeth, but it's just not what we see bears doing. So this, especially on the same trail, in association with other upward breaks or twist-offs, you're looking at a probable Sasquatch sign. It doesn't mean that the sign's fresh. It could be old. You can tell by seeing how well this part has survived. How many years of extra branching off this far piece are there? How many generations in the tree? How many generations of branching have you got? That'll give you an idea how many seasons that tree has survived beyond the initial break. So maybe there was a Sasquatch or a bear or a human there 4 years ago, 3 years ago, what have you. Okay, Jason. Thanks. We're about halfway along now. You can double click on that. Okay, another bend up. At first I thought, somebody's been working on this. It's an old one, and it was cut, and then whatever. But when you examine it closely, you'll see that these ends inside of the main piece, here's the main curving branch coming up here, here's the break starting, splinter off here, curve backwards and upwards here. Just no way snow or weather's going to do that. And you can pull it down, you can pull the branch down, sometimes with a friend. There's no harm in it. Just look at the tree. Alders all in these cases. I don't have any fir. I saw fir when I lived in the Walla Walla area. Used to see firs twisted quite a bit. But everything I've seen, almost everything I've seen on Vancouver Island was alder twisted, and up here in Alaska, alder as well. That's about, by the way, that's about 9 feet above the ground. So it's just in the upper range for what we usually see, 6 to 9 feet off the ground for trailside markers. We don't think there was any feeding involved in any of this. With a feeding, where the Sasquatch might have, or a bear, might have broken the tree for feeding, you're going to see stripped bark or maybe the branch is completely removed. Bears are going to do that, Sasquatches too. It seems it's the same thing. If you find a whole pile of branches right on the road, I can't say that we have any strong evidence for linking that with Sasquatches, but there's a lot of native folklore that just says they just leave a trail of twigs or a trail of branches wherever they are. Bears may do that, but I haven't been able to find evidence of them doing it. I know they turn up rocks, but I haven't been able to find anything that links that with bears. They just seem to eat it, down it goes. There's no trail of food left off down the trail behind bears. Here's a questionable one. It was only about 2 feet off the ground. It's about a 2-inch alder, and it's an old break that survived, actually. And bear, human, or Sasquatch? No, it's not the classic Sasquatch height. It's not 6 to 9 feet. It's a low. This red alder is broken off quite low, and it was at least 5 feet from the old road. Could logging equipment have done it? When you see an open scar like this, it causes you to start thinking about something like that. But the logging had been long gone when this tree had been gone for years when this tree was damaged. Could hunters have done it? Yes, it's possible. But again, I didn't see any evidence of a sharp cut anywhere. So with a vehicle passing, if this were right on the side of the road, you might think, oh, a vehicle has knocked it down, especially if there's an abrasion. The whole side of the bark on the let's call it the truckward or the carward side of the tree is going to be stripped of bark or bruised. It'll just look like guys taking a heavy grit sandpaper or a Makita belt sander and taking all the bark off that side. And you don't see that in these. We did see old sign where a vehicle had scraped bark off about 20 years ago on the trail, but it was really obvious and it was bumper height. Go ahead. Now, little breaks like this high up when they're by themselves, especially when the main branch approaches the vertical, are possibly bear, but not likely if they're by themselves, since the bear usually steps on a whole bunch of other branches in order to get up there. When it's like this, you're thinking weather right away. Weather's one possibility. But whether you're going to see a whole lot of other branches in a similar situation doing the same thing, especially branches that aren't as heavily built or as skookum. So if you're seeing this in conjunction with other sign that already smacks of Sasquatch, you've got to think, put that on the list of possible, and then you're looking there for hair. Maybe you're just going to run your little adhesive roller with the cellophane adhesive up and down the branch to see if you can't get some hair. This near vertical alignment with a break in it like this, with a spear up, is actually a typical type of break for alder, regardless of whether it's a 1 foot diameter alder going up 20 feet or whether it's a little guy. So yes, it could have been snow loading on this part, and then you see this break. It's just possible. However, this is one of those vague ones. I have to be just perfectly honest with you on that. We wouldn't know, okay? Hard to define. One of those areas of gray. Thanks, Jason. Now here's a funny pattern. It shows 2 out of a total of, there's another third, slightly lower one, identical to these 2 other alders that are broken. This is actually at about 5 feet, taken from a crouching position to get the muskeg in the background, and another alder. They're about 7/8 of an inch at that break point, and they're all bent in the same direction toward the old trail. So if you were coming from the muskeg, you'd be bending your branches in toward the road. I didn't see bear sign on it. I didn't see any bruises on the bark. It was just an odd pattern. We tend to see patterns in 3 on this. So I don't know about this. 3. There was no sign of twigs on the end having been browsed, no sign of browse anywhere, or branches broken off. Alder will show scars where their buds and branches are broken off. Please go on. So that was a question mark, although it was a very curious one. You can see that this branch is not bent down, as by weather, as by snow or ice or wind, okay? You're looking at an upward break, and it would be hard for a bear to get out there without taking the whole branch off. You can see that my friend who's 5'9" is not quite getting there. Now, could a basketball player do it? Yeah, why? You know, and if you're not seeing evidence of people out there, tracks or, you know, car tracks or RV tracks, whatever, you can assume this is perhaps a Sasquatch trail sign. Again, you can't ever prove it unless you see them do it, or you have to take DNA off the branch. Maybe if we start taking latent fingerprints off smooth alder branches or getting DNA swabs, we might be able to do that sort of thing. Okay, continue on. Okay, and another bend back. So, you know, if you see a branch that's bent out this way and the break is down, it's a down break as opposed to an up break, think weather, people, you know, disease, natural disease, insects or fungus. Continue on next. But this sort of back break can allow you to at least suspect Sasquatch. What we noticed a lot were triplets of breaks. Triplets. And why does weather break things in triplets? You know, it's like you have time to do 1, 2, 3, move along. There are, let me just interject really briefly. Let's see if I can do this in 10 seconds. Jay Hewson, who's a land manager for Sealaska, he's a native, over on Prince of Wales Island, and his colleague, you might say, the other land manager for the adjacent Kwakhenia Native Corporation, who is Jim Galactinoff, both had an alleged encounter with 4 or 5, at least 2 adults and a large group of or smaller hair-covered hominids 2 years ago on Prince of Wales, and there was allegedly a lot of screaming and so on. And these men have been tracking, looking at trail signs, stacked rocks and broken branches on Prince of Wales for the last at least 10 years. And what they hypothesize is that trail signs like stacked rocks and broken branches, if they're not feeding, if they don't have indication of feeding, you know, leaves stripped off or what have you, that they're markers for family members. They feel the males, from what they've seen with tracks and their one sighting, they think that the dominant male or the at least the male in question goes through an area and marks his passing at junctures for his family members to follow. That's just what they think. They don't read any books. They don't get on the internet. They're just natives who study this sort of thing a whole lot. That's what they happen to think. Interesting hypothesis. Don't know how we would test it. Not too many more. This is Dave Rubin, one of my research partners. These down breaks are all, could have been human bear or Sasquatch. They're down. Deer, black-tailed deer, don't quite have they're not quite skookum enough to really do this without taking a buck might in rut in the fall. Take off the bark from a couple inches up to maybe 3 feet up as he puts his head down with his velveted antlers to try to take off all the velvet. Pacific Northwest blacktails do that from here right up to Prince William Sound, and you'll see one of their favorite little trees is pine, shore pine, but they'll do it with fir, they'll do it with spruce, and sometimes with alder, and you'll see them at the edges of muskegs. Those are little rub trees, buck rubs they're called. There may be scent there may be a lot of deer scent from his glands, but we didn't see any of this deer sign there, and we can head along. So this is something that's suspicious. There were no clear, it's older, it's nothing really fresh, but it didn't seem like weather, since this is actually a back bend, and this branch off it is a front bend. So at the same time as this top of the branch was going whoop over that way, this one was coming down, and here's another There's another bend here. So that's a down bend. And this is actually a down bend. It may not be clear in the photo, but that's not an up bend, that's a down bend. So it's a down break. Okay. I'm sorry if this is all pretty boring. I know it's very, very speculative and there's no Sasquatch tracks or reports of Sasquatch in this. But either down breaks that could have been weather, except that they were so far out at the end. It's got the spear that's typical of weather. No spear here. These could both just as easily have been done by hand, reaching up. Again, human or Sasquatch. No sign that a bear was climbing on that shrub or breaking any of its branches down to get these. That's alder again, by the way, not huckleberry. Okay. These alders are really vulnerable to getting broken by weather at the first ice storm or snowstorm of the year. If it comes early, when they've still got leaves on. If they've lost their leaves already, you won't get this kind of considered possibility for breakage. Bent right down, down, all down breaks on the side of the road. Because they happen together, it suggests weather. Or ice related to a possible icing, but if I didn't see disease and I didn't see a rot inside the branches, so I'm leaving that one open. That's just a question mark. You can see you get a lot of question marks with this. Nice and fresh in March. This had happened not too long ago, and we didn't have any ice storms or snowstorms or anything that could have really done this. And so I was looking, bears? No, they're still kind of sleeping. There were no marks here, just some old insect gall here. And this one doesn't show clearly as a break, but they're suspicious, and they happened. There were two of them happening together. No feed marks on the end. Okay. So this is all as you go along this trail. These spears, I was inclined to think ice damage from the fall. Okay, just because you can see this long spear sticking out a nice sharp clear mark and the peel coming back down. But certainly not a bear and not likely human. This kind of damage you'll see around campsites where Mom says, okay, marshmallows. All you kids, go. And all the kids run into the thickets and they grab either huckleberry or alder, whatever they can to get their hot dog sticks or their marshmallow sticks. But way out there, there's no practical purpose for any guy, any hunter, stripping these branches down. You're either looking bear or, if you have moose or elk in other places, you've got to deal with that too. Go ahead, pass on. And just more kind of vague breaks that show how high off the ground some of this is. Again, my thought was not weather and certainly not bear, and very little likelihood of a human. Here's a back break again, so you can exclude all weather right away. Bears aren't in the habit of doing that. They can do a back break, but you're going to see the tooth marks. And just continue on. That was a low one, so that suggested to me, either a little baby Sasquatch or maybe Sasquatch is reaching down and doing a break. Just a view of the river, just showing the ecosystem, the type of vegetation that occurs there in March. Continue on. Home stretcher, just a few more slides. Now, on the White River, which is another river not far from Upper Talbot Creek, it's only 5 miles away, I've probably got five reported visual sightings over the last 20 years, maybe as many vocalizations, and I think there's one set of tracks. And I walked up the river 2 weeks ago amid a lot of bear tracks and wolf tracks, fresh wolf scat, and I actually went up through Devil's Club along the shore of the river and came back in the river, kind of just went in. It was a little bit cool, but it happened to be a really warm day. It actually hit 70 in Alaska. That's a heat wave. And the water was really, really low. And I found these rocks along a section that we'd been wading in. There was, 10 feet of creek on one side and 20 feet on the other. And there was a steelhead in the water beside me, nice big, torpedo-shaped guy. And my partner and I noticed these rocks sitting up, it'd be about 2 inches and and 2.5 inches, just sitting on this big mossy log in the water. And I couldn't figure out what they'd be doing there. There aren't people who go up and down there. As far as I know, we're the only ones crazy enough to do that. And eagles don't drop anything. There's freshwater mussel in there. There's the cutthroat, the dollies. Well, salmon do come up in here. The water hadn't been high enough, even in the last year or two, to do that. Okay? It just hadn't been up over that log. We'd all watched it. But there's tons of caddisfly, not there, but underneath all these rocks of that size. So if you pick up a rock that size, there's caddisfly larvae on the bottom. And it kind of made me wonder if I were walking along the creek at night and I just kept on picking up rocks like that off the bottom and putting them in my mouth and sucked really hard. I wonder how much insect meat I'd get off that. It occurred to me I might get quite a bit. So we're just going to do a little study. We're just going to sort of slough all the caddisfly larvae off and see how much we can actually grind down, how much protein we can collect at the end of the hike down the river. Submit that to Ray Crow and Track Record, let them know what we find. Go ahead. Or it might have just been, who knows. Put the rocks on a log. Play rocks on a log. 9 feet up. Nothing too significant about this except it was all by itself. No indication of weather. Just one of those really high breaks. You can pass on. Next one. Home stretch. Probably 30 feet past the last one. So you're looking at a long. There's no real indication of anything on this. It was a little bit like a weather break if there'd been icing on it. It's just possible. It's close enough in that it might have been a weather break, but I couldn't say. Showing the good, the bad, and the boring. Click along. Next one. Home stretch. No teeth marks on this. I thought that there might have been, but I checked it out and they were just insect. No bruises, no cuts, no healing. 7/8 of an inch up at about 9 feet. No sign of browsing. Just curious, couldn't say for sure. Wolf track, and it was there. It was there after I'd hiked back down the trail on my last trip up to Upper Talbot Creek, and our wolves aren't that big. They're not like the Coast Range wolves that are 140 pounds or so. These ones are probably only 80 pounds. Of course, the deer they're eating are just kind of poodles, the black-tailed deer, and they're not that big. And the wolf scat was pretty fresh. It was fresh bone, so lots of deer in the area. This just evidences what kind of ecosystem there is, what the biomass is, what it'll support. The scat's really green and fresh and mucousy, so that'll tell you when you see scat that's mucousy, a couple hours, really fresh. Well, it was probably 4 hours since we'd gone down the trail the other way with no scat and coming back. That ties in. Some people will tell you that, if it turns black on the outside and it's still green on the inside, it's a day or two old, and if it's all black, the further in it's black, the older it is for bear or wolf scat. That's been my experience. Bear scat's usually purple in the fall because of all the blueberries, but at this time of the year, it's kind of greenish. It's kind of the same color as the wolf scat. Didn't see anything that could have been Sasquatch scat, unless we're looking at a juvenile Sasquatch scat, which raises the question, how do you tell baby Sasquatch poop, without a diaper? How do you tell baby Sasquatch poop? So, just another shot, so nothing more. Fresh deer bone, so I guess it had found a deer, that wolf had found a deer. Interesting twist here with another break. There were actually 3 altogether. So there's the twist, and then there was a break down, just a down break. It's not really a twist as much as it is an unsuccessful down break. Alder is really, really green, and if you go home and you take an alder next to your house, now take a little one about this tall, do a 10-year experiment and weave it, do 2 loops right around an adjacent tree, you'll find that 10 years from now it's twisted. No disease, we just figure this is typical, the same trail, typical Sasquatch sign. Really hard to do with your bare hands. This found evidence of bear browsing. The bears had stripped the ends. It looked like bear, and there were some bear claw marks that I didn't unfortunately get developed. And it appears that these are 2 old healed they looked like bud scars, but I believe they were bite marks that the bear had left. So when you see something 2 inches apart, 2.5 inches apart, that looks like a recent scar, either on a stick on the ground. Of course, that doesn't mean that isn't a Sasquatch that's chewed on that. You can consider bear, especially if the branches were broken off at the height of a bear's head above the ground. Next, please. Got to be the last one. Just what it looked like when we went up the trail. Although there was skunk cabbage starting to come up in a few spots and a lot of green forbs, I don't know if there's skunk cabbage showing this one, we didn't see a lot of bear sign. The bears weren't up when we were up this particular trip. They're up there now. They weren't up when we photographed then. But that's what it's like up there. You can see its second growth. You can see all that, grown in 20, 30 years since they logged. But, okay, is that it? Is that the last one? Okay. Any questions about what we're looking at up there? Can anybody tell me what we're looking at up there? Yes. Hello. I have. What I didn't show you in this, I just wanted to keep it short. Another time I could show you. Piles of sticks just put like in a crisscross puzzle on the ground. I usually find this in association with where rocks, if I'm thinking it's a bear, I look around if I see rocks that have been picked up and carried a distance, I'm going, oh, that was some bear, So look how far away from the hole in the ground your rock is. Bear, if Dr. Bindernuggle's estimates of population for Sasquatches to bears are anywhere correct, 100 to 200 bears for every Sasquatch, then you've got to look at an awful lot of holes in the ground and rocks before you see the first one that might be indicative of Sasquatch feeding. But what we have seen are nests, and there's a photograph of a nest that I haven't seen. We tried to find it on this trip, and it's up the White River, and it's a Devil's Club circular pattern made of Devil's Club, a whole bunch of Devil's Club that is woven big time. And you have to ask yourself, well, that doesn't sound like the usual Sasquatch nest. Why would a Sasquatch sleep there? But what we're thinking, what we're all just thinking is nests are made by females. Typically, that's what we feel. We feel the males don't even bother making their bed. They just lie down in the ditch, on the bed, on the bridge, wherever. In Alaska, they seem to sleep almost anywhere. Kids kick them out. These nests are female structures made by females with young or for young, and they may be, more importantly than that, they may be a playpen, a play area, a crib. Stay there. And so that we feel this Devil's Club thing would be the ideal playpen. You put your kid in there, he stays there, give him stuff to play with. Catch your fish, whatever, come back, as the sun's starting to come up, he's still there. Unless you're going to carry him with you all the time. I don't know. Guess it depends on how many kids you have.
Yeah, Rob.
So, yeah.
I actually have a question, and I really appreciate what you covered, even though many people may have found it boring.
Well, I'm sure it's boring for almost everybody here.
Sorry
about that, you guys.
When you do field experience, though, what's exciting to me is that trying to track these things, because I've tried it. And being out in Washington, there's a lot of brush, and it is very challenging. And so, what I want to ask you is the frequency. Like, did you see like a consistent? Like, I can imagine these things walking along every so many moments, just going snap.
Right.
Every so many, trying to mark a trail. Is that what you guys are finding?
That's what we're finding. That ties in with the tracks and with the reports that we get. So when we have a report, maybe it's just a vocalization. It's not unusual for us to find things like this, but not on the edge. Yes, but only when you're away from town. Not as you get close to buildings or close to structures. So where their home core area is, we don't see. We see this, but we don't see this in close to town. Okay.
Dan?
Sorry, Dan.
I'm curious as a former investigator, and when you mentioned that there were no tracks, can you give me a reason why? Do you think there was no tracks? Was the terrain is just too brushy, or?
Yeah, it's the typical Alaskan reasons. This is an old hard-packed road. It doesn't take. We do have little bits of creek, but even the deer and the wolves are hardly. That wolf track, that was the only bit of substrate that could have revealed any kind of mammalian track for about 30 miles. We're lucky. Even the trails on. I shouldn't say that. The creek itself is great. It's lousy with bear, beaver, and wolf track. So the White River, not Talbot Creek. Talbot Creek's just gravel. But White River, which is also a good Sasquatch research area, vocalizations and so on, Maybe next time I'll have some more interesting, maybe I'll have some tapes, or maybe I'll have something substantial to show you rather than all this esoteric stuff. But we find that it's just really hard in Alaska to get tracks. Even if they don't know they're leaving tracks, there's not a lot of area for them to leave it. Cruise the shoreline.
Mr. Perez has a question.
Yo.
Comment and a question. Number one, I'd like to congratulate you on the book that you published several years ago called The Raincoast Sasquatch.
Thank you very much.
I review a lot of the literature published in various magazines, but namely Fate magazine, and I thought it was one of the best books ever published on the subject matter.
Thank you very much.
Secondly, maybe you can relate just very briefly to this audience. I think the 1993 report from Alaska with a pregnant female with the guy in the boat with the rifle scope on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think they would be absolutely fascinated by that report.
The taxidermist's report, a summary of that. John Green found the report interesting. The man drew of the face of a creature that looked a little more gorilla than it did, erectus hominid, a little more pongid than hominid. He was, about 10 years ago, 90, it's around 91, he was on a crabbing boat west of Ketchikan up in Ernest Sound and on the other side of the Cleveland Peninsula, and he stated that he'd surprised a creature on a beach while, pot hunting one morning, hunting for deer meat or bear meat to, supplant their, boost their larder on the boat. And he thought it was a bear, and I think he just had a 243. He had a big 9-power, and he put it on this, what he thought was the back of a bear sitting on the beach for a while. And the taxidermist, his initials MM, works in Ketchikan. He lives in Ketchikan. He does other things. He's an amateur taxidermist. He really he drew an illustration. I wish I could show it to you. I don't have a slide of a female who would be lactating, if we can use the Patterson film by a similar standard. The only difference in the taxidermist drawing was that she was really quite wide and pregnant, as all get out. Now, the abdomen was huge and it was swollen from sternum right to pubis. And I've done some gynecology as a physical therapist. That was a long time ago in an area where we help deliver babies. Don't do that too much anymore. But Oregon. I'm also a retired chiropractor. Never went to Oregon where they still deliver babies. Never did that. But I can appreciate that, in October, a female that looks full-term, either full-term pregnant, she either is full-term pregnant, we can say 9 months, we'll assume 9 months is the same for all the great apes and man, then you're looking at when did she possibly conceive? Where's my fellow Scott, my colleague who's so free and easy in talking about such things, When did the intercourse take place, So is that the quiet time when we don't get reports? Is that because they're all out, dating? They're all out, they're checking out the other neighborhood. They're cruising? Is that why they don't come? So I don't know, but it's a beautiful drawing. He said he was going to squeeze. Said she was too beautiful. He said the creature was just beautiful animal, perfect condition and everything like that. And the reason the first thing that stopped him from squeezing the trigger was the foot. He was looking at the back end, looking at her hunched down, thought it was a bear messing in the sand looking for something. But he could see its feet, the back of its feet. And he said, noticed it particularly just before, a few minutes of observation, the creature got up. He said he could see the foot, the plantar surface, was curved in a C, in a flexible manner, unlike any bears he had ever seen. So not only was she sitting on her haunches, on her heels, her foot had a tremendous plasticity. Dr. Meldrum's discussed the plantar break. I think the late Dr. Krantz had also discussed this, that the tremendous plasticity of the feet as seen in reports. And yeah, it's fascinating. So the letter C. And he hadn't read any of these books. He wasn't familiar with, the work of Dr. Krantz or Dr. Meldrum or any of the other reports, really, and he couldn't have known that. But he said he knew it wasn't a bear then, and when she stood up, looked right at him. He was in a skiff. He stayed in the boat, quiet. He shut his motor as soon as he come around the corner, just sort of looking at it, drifting there. The Sasquatches in Alaska are apparently pretty used to boats. Get a lot of reports, guys on boats. They don't get disturbed by them, even if the motor's going. So I don't know. I guess it's just something they see all the time, boats going by. So I have a lot of reports from fishermen who state they see things on shore and describe them in detail. There was a cruise, there's something that never made the press. There's a bookshop in Juneau, and 2 people who work there, along with 7 other people who were in Juneau on a cruise 2 summers ago, south of Juneau, on a cruise boat, reported a sighting just a few hundred yards on shore. It was a big 9-foot Sasquatch, dark brown or black. And but in Alaska, nothing makes the papers. I've had to dig, I've had to work, and I've had to be so patient there to get people to share the stories or to not get arrested by the police trying to dig out the stories. The troopers keep buying copies of that book surreptitiously, and one trooper told me it keeps disappearing from their coffee table, so they've had to buy more copies. So somebody at the trooper station, either he's trying to stop his colleagues from reading it, or they all really enjoy it. So, and we've got, the police do get reports, they don't tell us too much, screaming, all that sort of thing. Questions? More questions? Jason?
Two more questions, one from Paul, one from Al Berry. Hang on.
Hey, Rob, I apologize if I came in a little late, so maybe you already touched base on this.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the tree twists and everything, which I think are fascinating.
Twists? Big tree twists?
Tree twists.
Tree twists, mm-hmm.
But it seems that in a true scientific method or fashion, you would want to posit different theories about this. Have you come to any other possible, I don't know,
well, we've considered.
Is there any other things that besides maybe a
that we should consider, right? Yeah.
What do you compare it with?
Well, the other things, if you're a bit north of where we're at, if you're up on Edelin or Zarimbo, you've got elk, and elk will get their antlers in everything, and they can turn it. They can turn it up pretty quickly. They can tear a brush. They can bring. But you're going to see cambium exposed. You're going to see the bark taken down because the antlers are going to be in there. Okay. So moose too, yeah, to a certain extent could do that, and there's no reason why a bear couldn't chomp down on something and put a twist on, but he'll leave evidence of that. It's a trick to do it without leaving any marks. You have to have big bare hands or gloves or something like that. We've considered wind. We've watched really carefully when we get the big winds, especially after a really big wind. If we get a weather report when there's a big wind, we get photo evidence of our trail. We go up there, we just do quick stuff. We take a survey of what's there. We try to run down the trail real fast or bike down it if it's a fairly good trail with a bike. You might want to consider doing this if you're close to home. Then you see what's happened after the storm. You can see what's attributable to storm, what's typical of storm damage, wind damage, that sort of thing. So we kind of do this in various ways. And we found that wind really takes things over at the roots, and you'll notice that here when you get a big storm through again next time in Oregon, Washington, BC. When it comes in off the Pacific, it'll take down all your trees, but it'll take them off at the roots, okay? Roots, excuse me. My Canadian roots are showing.
One more
Yeah.
question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we looked at a real interesting nest in Plum Creek, and this goes back into the 70s, but what can you tell us about the nesting behavior of bears?
Nesting behavior of bears, it's variable. There's certain, Tom Steenberg will tell you without a doubt, bears make nests during the day, and I agree with him. And I remember seeing this when I worked as a fish and wildlife tech in Manitoba, and I've also worked in the province of British Columbia for fish and wildlife. Summer jobs as a naturalist. When you're indoors as a PT, you sometimes want to get out. Bears make nests. They do that. They hibernate in the wintertime. You know that. But a daybed for a bear is not an elaborate affair. And you could read what Dr. Bindernagel has written, of course, about the primates, about what gorillas do. And when we're seeing bear bedding areas where bears have bedded down, they've usually just scuffed out something underneath a deadfall. We're seeing big cedars, big hemlock, big spruce. The bear will get in, he'll get in a fairly dry area. Everything in southeast Alaska is constantly dripping except for July and August. So wherever the bear are, they're trying to, they're just not going to be able to stay dry. They're putting up with being wet pretty much, okay? And until they get a high snowpack to cover them for the winter. But we've seen bears curl up underneath cabins, dig in under there. But they seem to like, and Sasquatches and bears both, we've got evidence in Alaska, they both do something in common. They'll hole up or rest up underneath a cedar, because the cedar just seems to act as a natural umbrella. No other species works quite like it. When you get on a hiking trail and you find a big old cedar, just get right in next to the bowl and look at how dry all the duff is in around there. So we've seen some evidence that bear, will get in there, but we've also found a lot of deer skulls in underneath some of these cedar, and I just wish we could get hair. Everything seems to wash down so damn quick, excuse me, in Alaska. It's like somebody's turning the shower on every day, Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks very much. Thank you.